Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 53 of Anticipation. I know I'm burning the midnight oil, but I couldn't figure this out. It's taking me hours and hours and hours. And you know what? The fact that Mashiach is not here yet means we shouldn't sleep. And we should try to understand how it is that we can hasten Mashiach's arrival. So tonight we're going to focus on a very unusual euphemism that is used to describe the present era. This time, just before the coming of Mashiach. Our journey is going to begin in the book of Psalms, at the end of the 89th chapter of Tehillim. King David HaMelech says, Zechor ad Hashem cherpas avodecha. David HaMelech says, remember, my God, the disgrace of your servants. The disgrace of Hashem's servants, se'esi v'cheiki kol rabim amim. David HaMelech says that he bears in his bosom, in his heart, the disgrace of so many nations. Asher chayerfu oivecha Hashem. Into verse 52. That your enemies have disgraced, denigrated, disrespected. They have disgraced Asher cherfu ikveis mishichecha. They have disgraced the footsteps of your anointed one. Which is the simple meaning of Mashiach, means anointed, or Hashem's anointed one. So what does this mean? What does it mean that the nations have disgraced the footsteps of Mashiach? What are the footsteps of Mashiach? What is this supposed to mean? So Rashi, in his commentary on Tehillim, says something, I think, very unusual. He doesn't deal with the fact that the word ikvot means heels or soles or footsteps. He says that the word ikvos should be understood as soifi melech hamashiach, quite literally, the ends of your anointed one. That's how it's translated in the Mitzudas Tehillim. The ends of your anointed one. That's what Sof is an end. So Sofi means the end of. And Rashi says that this language inspires our sages in the Mishna. And he refers here to Masechet Sota. We're going to take a look at the Gemara and the Mishnah as well. The Gemara is found on Daf Mem Tes Amud Beis, page 49b, in the Talmud Bavli and in the Talmud Yerushalmi. It's found towards the end of the 9th chapter. We'll find it in Halacha 16. And we're going to take a look at the Mishnah as well. I mean, the actual Mishnah is found in poetic Tes of Masechet Egla Arufa, and specifically it is Mishnah number 15 in the version that we have in our Mishnah. So you take a look in the Mishnah, and it says there, Be'ikvot HaMashiach, in the footsteps or the ends of Mashiach, Chutzpah Yazge, there is going to be an enormous increase in insolence. That's the meaning of chutzpah. So Rashi clearly explains that the meaning of ikvot means the end. Very interestingly, if you take a look in the Gemara that Rashi seems to reference here, the Gemara in Masechet Sota, the Gemara, this is on the final page of the Masechet, right on top of Memtes, page 49, Amud Beis, folio page side 2. The Gemara now is coming to elaborate and explain the language of the Mishnah, be'ikvot Mashiach chutz beyazgi. And Rashi says, be'ikvot Mashiach besof hagalut. At the end of the exile, lifnei biyat HaMashiach, before the coming of Mashiach. So Rashi sees this as the end of Mashiach means the end of Galut before the coming of Mashiach. Incidentally, Rashi's words seem to be acclaimed by the majority of the scholars, because in the Tosfos Yom Tov, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, on the words be'ikvot Mashiach chutz beyazgi, he says besof hagalut. So the ends of Mashiach, which is how Rashi explains it in the book of Psalms, here he says besof hagalut lifnei biyat HaMashiach, which is of course word for word transcription of Rashi, and the Tosfos Yom Tov says Rashi. It's Rashi's words. I found it very interesting when I looked in the Talmud Yerushalmi. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, we have two major commentators. One is called Pnei Moshe, and one is called Korban Ha'eda. And both, here on this term, say verbatim exactly the same thing. And I have to tell you that's very unusual, because oftentimes the Pnei Moshe and the Korban Ha'eda do not see eye to eye on the pshat, on the way to explain the words in the Gemara in the Talmud Yerushalmi. But here, both transcribe the words be'ikvot Mashiach. Interestingly, in the Talmud Bavli's version, it says be'ikvot HaMashiach. But here they transcribe the Mishnah as the Mishnah says it. And although the Mishnah is typically written in Hebrew, be'ikvot Mashiach, Mashiach here sounds to be written in Aramaic. Certainly an unusual to write Mashiach in Hebrew that way. So he says be'ikvot Mashiach, and both the Korban Ha'eda and the Pnei Moshe say exactly the same thing. Besof hagalut lifnei biyat HaMashiach. In the end of Galut, before the coming of Mashiach. So we have really almost unanimity. Unanimity in the pshat of the words of the Mishnah from Rashi, which is transcribed by the Tosfos Yom Tov, the Korban Ha'eda, and the Pnei Moshe. How does the word ikvot mean the end? Why does, an akev is a heel. Why does it mean the end? So to better understand this, we can take a look at the commentary of Ramban, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman, one of the major commentaries on the Torah. And in Parshas Akev, the Torah opens with the words, V'haya Akev tishma'un et hamishpatim ha'ela. And so, it will be, because and when you hearken or listen to the judgments or the ordinances of Hashem. So Ramban says, what is the meaning of V'hoya Akev Tishmon? And he says, HaMefarshim Amru, the Mefarshim say that the reason we say Hatam Akev, Akev means when, or it'll come to pass because. Now, coming to pass, or when you listen, in the end, the reward will come. It's not necessarily going to be swift or immediate, but in the end, the reward will come. Says Ramban, in his second interpretation, that this represents the concept of schar be'acharit, the reward for something that comes at the end. And Ramban says, we find something similar in the book of Psalms, Kapitel Yutes, Psalm 19, verse 12, it says, B'shamram Akev Rov, in their observance, meaning the observance of mitzvot, there will be a great deal of reward. So what does it mean in the end? Or V'hoya acharit tishmun. This is similar, as if the Torah is saying to us, that in the end, the end result of when you listen to the mishpatim, the tishmur otam, you listen to the ordinances and judgments of Hashem, sheyishmar l'cha Hashem, that in the end, Hashem will safeguard and keep this for you, es habris v'es hachesed, the covenant and the kindness. Now Ramban goes on to say, so why is Ekev the end? And he says, v'nochenu, this is an appropriate interpretation. In plain English, it makes sense. Why does it make sense? It makes sense, he says, because ki yikru b'loshen hakodesh tchilas kol davar b'shem rosh. Because in the holy tongue, in Hebrew, Torah Hebrew, we refer to the beginning of something as rosh, which literally means head. But we refer to it as rosh, as the beginning. So if the head represents the beginning, Kimo, for example, he says, the words of the psalmist in 119, verse 160, it says, Rosh devorcha emes. Now, Rosh there means the very first utterance of Hashem is truth. Rosh devorcha, not the head of your words, the first of your words. The initial, the inaugural utterance is truth. So too, we find the concept of the leaders of the people are called Roshei Ha'am. They're not literally a head, but they head the people. Oh, we could call this in modern English a headliner. So just as we understand that the leader is going to be called the Rosh, or the best is going to be called, he says, Hamishubach bo, the finest and the best is called Bisamim Rosh. And this is found in the 30th chapter of the book of Shemot, where we talk about selecting and choosing the finest of spices for the incense. And we talk about the finest and the best with Bisamim Rosh. So head doesn't mean a head, because there isn't a body of spices, but there is a higher grade or a better product. Precisely. Rosh, the head. And Ramban says, just as the best or the leadership or the beginning is called Rosh, v'chein, similarly, Yikaru acharit, we call the end of kol davar ekev, we call it the heel. Why? Because it says, Haloshen yitfeis dimyene ba'adam. The language adopts or grasps the euphemism, the figurative expression, the metaphor. It's a parable, so to speak. And the euphemism is, just like a human being, we say in English from head to toe, in Hebrew we'd say, Harosh ameroshoi v'ad ragloi, or ad akevoi, from his head to his heels. You ever hear, even in English, there's the expression of head over heels. So the concept then is, says Ramban, Rosh bo tchila, v'ekev bo achris v'sof. Rosh represents beginning, and Ekev represents the end. Now, if this is the case, then there are no footsteps of Mashiach per se. It's merely a typical biblical euphemism to describe the end. And interestingly, in Tehillim, Rashi calls it Sofi Melech HaMashiach, the end of Mashiach, which I guess would be like the end, not as in the end, but an edge, a pole, like a beginning, almost. But it's just like you take the ends of the paper or the ends of the sheet. So you're holding it by the poles, only that here it's the beginning. But interestingly, Rashi references the Mishnah, and there Rashi clearly says that the Sof is not referring to the end of Mashiach, but the end of Galut, which will lead us into the pole, like, you know, the bookending of the Messianic or Mashiach age. Okay, so this is the way we understand the concept of Ikvot Mashiach, and then we could say that Ikvot Mashiach means the end of Galut. And, I mean, by the way, this is the methodology or the verbiage that is used to describe the time before Mashiach, especially over the course of the last century and a half. There's been a lot of mentioning of the end of times, and that we are in the final stages of Galut and that we're about to enter into the Messianic age. More than 100 years ago, the Chafetz Chaim believed that we were in Ikvus Mashiach, and he founded an institute of study for learning the laws of Beit HaMikdash, because he said Mashiach is going to come and we're going to have korbanot, we're going to have offerings, and who's going to know those halachot? We have to have people who are trained to understand and to know how to give a decisive ruling. He believed very strongly, and he wrote a great deal using that terminology, as did his disciple Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. And the truth is that within the Hasidic world, the term Ikvus de Mashiach was used very often by the previous Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and our Rebbe oftentimes would refer to our generation as the Doir of Ikvus de Mashiach. Okay, so it means the end. We're at the end. Footsteps, heel, not necessarily. But that's not so simple. It's not so simple because there is another source in the writings of our sages that clearly speak about the concept of a foot, of a heel, or footsteps. In the Midrash Rabbah on Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, near the end of the second chapter, the Midrash Rabbah, in some versions it's subsection 33, in others it's 29. The Midrash Rabbah says the following: Omar Rabbi Yanai, the sage Rabbi Yanai taught, Im tire doir achar doir mechoref umegadeif. Should you see that there is generation after generation that blasphemes and curses and disgraces and denigrates, tzapei leraglei melech HaMashiach, then wait for the footsteps of Mashiach. That's what he says. Wait. Who are they cursing? Who are they denigrating? The Mefarshim say, Yisrael, the people, the nation of Israel. So wait then for the footsteps of Mashiach. How do we know that? So Rav Yanai has a very interesting way of understanding the end of Psalm 89. We read verse 51 and verse 52, but then there's verse 53. And the Pasuk says, Asher cherfu evecha, Hashem, Asher cherfu ikvis mishichecha. They have disgraced your footsteps, Hashem. They have disgraced the footsteps of Mashiach. They have disgraced your enemies have disgraced the footsteps of Mashiach. And then he says, Maksiv Basrei. What is the next verse? What's verse 53? He says, after that says, Baruch Hashem la'olam, Amen, ve'amen. Blessed be God forever or for eternity, Amen and Amen. And here, the Midrash seems to understand that this business of blessed be God for eternity, Amen ve'amen, that this is referring to the praise that we will offer when Mashiach finally comes. And when does it say, Baruch Hashem la'olam, blessed be Hashem for eternity, Amen v'amen? After we experience Asher cherfu evecha Hashem, Asher cherfu ikvis mishichecha. So in the words of the Midrash, it's very clear that we're tzapei leraglei melech HaMashiach. This is not speaking merely about a time. It's not employing the euphemism of the human body to indicate beginnings or ends, but rather we are specifically focused on footsteps, on the heels of Mashiach. Now, the Midrash Rabbah is from our sages. The Gemara isn't clear. The Gemara doesn't say. Rashi explains the words of the Gemara. The Mefarshim explain the words of the Mishnah. But the Gemara doesn't explain that language. And here we have a clear statement by our sages that indicates the concept not only of the end, but rather the heels of Mashiach. And very interestingly, if we go back now to the actual commentaries on Tehillim, we have the Pirush Ha'Even Ezra, who says like this: if you want to appreciate and understand the meaning of Ikvot Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, he says, take a look at Genesis 25. In verse 26, it describes the birth of our father Jacob. He was born grasping the heel of Esav, it says. So he says, this is Migzeres, this comes from the same root as Akev Esav, the heel of Esav. Or something that King David says earlier in Psalm 77, Psalm 77, verse 20, it says, Ve'ikveisecha le'nedo, and your footsteps they did not know. So he seems to indicate that there is an emphasis on footsteps. So what's the disgrace? How do you disgrace the footsteps? Where's the denigration? So the Even Ezra says, V'hatam, and the reason for this denigration is she'echaru pa'om of love, because his footsteps are belated. They're like slow in coming. And Even Ezra says this is ka'oimram. It's, as people might say, nishburu akevav alkein lo yaviata. He's broken his ankles. He's broken his feet. He's broken his heels. He's broken feet. And because he has injured his feet, he's not able to walk. So he's belated. And of course, we're only 1953 or 54 years since the Beis HaMikdash has been destroyed. It's long overdue, as they say. And David HaMelech was prophetically and poetically alluding to the tragic reality of how long our Galut is going to go. Clearly from the Even Ezra, it is not merely the meaning of an end, not merely a euphemism for the conclusion, but we specifically refer to the concept of heels. The Radak, Rabbeinu David Kimchi, says something quite similar. He says, what's the disgrace? What's the disgrace? He says, Ikvas Mishichecha. His acharut Mishichecha. The delay, the belated nature of Mashiach's arrival. Shemesacher love. The Omrim, he's taken a heck of a long time. He's tarrying. And they say to us, La Yaveh La'olam, give it up. He's not coming anymore. There's not going to be a Mashiach, they say. And he says, Ki ekev hu achres haguf v'sofo, because the ekev is the end of the body. It's the end. It's the end of the body. So, you look at the Radak, it's not clear whether we have to have an emphasis on that body part, or it just happens to be the end. But it's certainly, there's a compelling nature in his commentary. He seems to be indicating either what Ramban is saying, that it's just a euphemism, or maybe a little bit more. Maybe a little more. To be sure, the Metzudas David and Metzudas Sion speak about the belated nature of Mashiach's arrival, and they don't get into the heel business. But remember, our sages actually did emphasize that. Now, apropos to the commentary of the Even Ezra, there's a very interesting commentary of the Vilna Gaon in Aderes Eliyahu on Megillas Esther. Right at the beginning of Megillas Esther, the Vilna Gaon speaks about Achashverosh. And the word Achashverosh is connected to the concept of Rosh. And he says is the proverbial head of the snake. Like Nachash HaKadmoni, the primordial serpent, is also called the Rosh. And then the Vilna Gaon in his the commentary is broken into different segments. There's Al Derech HaPshat, Al Derech HaRemez, there's a simple meaning, then there's the things that the verse might be alluding to, and then there's Al Derech HaSoid within the framework of the Cabalistic and spiritual interpretation of things. But in his Remez, what he alludes to, he says, we are taught that Yaakov and Esav, who were twins, were conceived in succession. Yaakov was conceived first, and Esav was conceived second. And the metaphor he uses is of the fallopian tubes, or a tube. And he says the first one who was conceived was the last one to come out. And he gives a metaphor of placing something in a tube. The first one in is the last one out. And there's a lot to talk about this birth. And if you go to my website, rabbikaplan.tv, and you Google Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau, and their birth, I have a whole fascinating class about this, where they seem to be identical twins, but they're not identical at all. But their voices were identical, and their gait is identical, and their mannerisms are identical, but they look very different on the surface. So, in a word, and without being a spoiler of what that class is about, we have, broadly speaking, either maternal twins or fraternal twins. So maternal twins means that the egg divides after fertilization, and that's identical twins. Or fraternal twins is where you have two separate fertilizations that take place. And clearly from the Midrash, Yaakov and Esav are fraternal, not maternal twins. But for a variety of reasons, there seems to be a very, very close resemblance, to the point of an identical resemblance on some level. And how is that possible? I'm not talking about the external perspective, I'm talking about their voices. And the only way that's possible is if the egg divides prior to fertilization. It's a different kind of fraternal twins. It's 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million, but there is documented evidence of something like this that went down a couple of years ago. And again, go watch that class if you find it interesting. At any rate, the Vilna Gaon invokes this Midrash. And he says that Yaakov, who was formed first or conceived first, is the last to emerge. And he interprets this, he says, Esav takes, it says in the Midrash, he takes possession of Olam Hazeh, of the material terrestrial world, and Yaakov, he takes Olam Haba, which can be understood either as the world that comes to us after we finish our terrestrial life, can also be understood as the world that has yet to come, the Messianic world. And he says like this, Tchilas HaMachshava hu sof ma'aseh. The first thought that a person has, here he's quoting Sefer Yetzirah, the first thought is the final action, the end result. And he says, Tachlis ha'olam hazeh hu ha'olam haba. The whole purpose of this world is the next world. Like the Mishna says, this is an antechamber. It's merely a foyer. The ultimate destination, if you want to talk about, the reward and punishment element, is what happens in the next world. But if you want to speak about it more broadly, theologically, the purpose of our world as it exists in the present form, with so much concealment of a divine, is so that we reach the fruition and realization of Dira B'Tachtonim, of Hashem's dwelling place, and Hashem's presence is revealed. And that's what creation is all about. So the Vilna Gaon says, that's why it says, Yodai Eichezes Be'ekav Esav, because even though Esav comes first, Yaakov is holding on to his heel, because Yaakov, who means heel also, is the ultimate purpose. That's what comes at the end. And that will be, he says, V'hu liyemot HaMashiach. That's the world to come. That's the ultimate purpose. V'lochein nikra ikvot Mashiach. That's why it's called ikvot Mashiach. So, according to the Vilna Gaon, it's not a question of the end of Galus. It's a question of the end game, the ultimate purpose. And that's why it's called Ikvas Mashiach. Seems pretty here that the Vilna Gaon would then learn that Olam Haba is not referring to Gan Eden or paradise or the place Neshamot, souls, go to after they complete their terrestrial journey, but rather the perfected, beautiful future world of Mashiach. And that's the end game. So that's why it's called Ekev. But it's very important for us to take note of the fact that in the Vilna Gaon's commentary, there is a very heavy emphasis on the heel, or the nature of body part. Because in Pshuto Shal Mikra, if you read the verse literally, Yaakov was born holding on to the heel of Esav. So whilst all of this is euphemistic, it is clearly, without a doubt, also very much related to the specifics of that euphemism, the idea that in the end, we're talking about the heel. And that brings me to something incredible that the Rebbe said in Shabbos Parshas Boi. The year is 1984, 5744, Tafshir Mem Dalet. So the Rebbe said at this Verbringen that the term or title, Ikvis Mashiach, is indicative of what we could refer to as a seeming paradox. There's a paradoxical element here. L'chayra. Mitzad echad, said the Rebbe, it's Ekev Bilvad, we're just a heel. And the heel is at the bottom. The rosh is at the top, the heel is on the bottom. It's lamata mehalev. It's much lower than the heart. V'chol sha'or chelki haguf. And the rest of the parts of the body. Ad lebechina hachi tachtoina sheberegel, till the lowest part of the leg or the foot. Ubeloshan hayadua, in the language of our sages that speaks about the present day reality, our generation and what we're capable of. Is this generation the one that's going to be prepared to experience the loftiest revelation and the most wonderful, magnificent of transformations? So that seems to indicate the fact that we are of a lowly nature. Incidentally, this idea that the Rebbe is talking about here, that our generation is the Ekev, is the foot, is something that is alluded to in a sefer which is called Safra Ditzniusa. And in this Safra Ditzniusa, which is a sefer that was printed somewhere early on in the 19th century, they cite a teaching, an oral teaching, which is not printed in any of his works, but there's a teaching cited in the name of the Vilna Gaon, that Ikvas de Mashiach is Meloshen Ekev, that it means heel, that it's Tachtis Ha'adam, that it's the lowest part of the person, and that's because the Dorot HaRishonim were Bechinas Moach V'Lev. The earlier generations could be metaphorically depicted as heart and mind. U'ma'asehim bo mikoyach pnimiyusam, and their actions came from a very deep, and a very profound and thoughtful place. But in these last generations, our actions are merely superficial and aren't expressions of deep profundity. And they aren't coming out of an abundance of thoughtfulness or, shall we say, intense passion. Just like the heels are furthest from the head and the heart. So the Rebbe says something similar, right? The Rebbe is like talking about this idea that on one hand we're just the Ekev, we're just the heel. But the Rebbe says there's a paradox here. Because our sages tell us that this concept of Ikvis Mashiach is also that we are already starting to hear the footsteps of Mashiach. Here the Rebbe says, because kvar magishim v'shoymim pa'amei ikvas HaMashiach, we can hear his footsteps resonating. So we are the Ekev, however we hear footsteps of Mashiach. And because we can hear the footsteps of Mashiach, so we are already, so to speak, poised to experience something which is unique, which is remarkable. Incidentally, I just want to point out that the Metzudas Tzion says that the Ekev is Achrit HaRegel, it's Sofo, it's the end of the foot. Similar to what the Ramban says in Parshas Ekev. I mean, this is no question that's being alluded to. It's no question that is an emphasis here. But at the same time, the Mefarshim on the Midrash Rabbah and Shir Hashirim say that the idea of hearing the footsteps of Mashiach is that we're already starting to hear the footsteps of change. And that means we're very close, but it means also we're in the know of change. We're able to sense the change, which does not denote feelingless, mindless, rote kind of Yiddishkeit. It denotes a certain inspiration, a certain energy, a certain maybe awareness or even subliminal clairvoyance that this final generation has, and we sense the coming of Mashiach. So that's a paradox, because on one hand we're like the lowest of the low, and on the other hand we seem to be in tune with a higher frequency. And the Rebbe said that truth be told, haba hatalya, one necessarily hinges on the other. Precisely because we are the generation that is metaphorized as the Akev, the last generation. And we come at the conclusion of 100 generations that precede us. But precisely because of that, we have the empowerment and the residual impact of hundreds of ancestors who have preceded us. And this over 100 generations that precedes us have done an enormous amount of goodness, and good is accumulative, and good is eternal. And we are the heirs to that great legacy. And as such, there is a metaphor that our rabbis offer to explain how Mashiach might come in our generation when he didn't come in the previous generations. Surely they were more worthy. And the answer is, and this is something that Rebbe spoke about many times, we are kananos al gabe anok, like a midget on the shoulders of a giant. So the giant can't reach because it's too high. But the midget, who is much, much shorter than the giant, is able to reach because he's on the giant's shoulders. And therefore, dafke dorze, our generation, yes, you and I, we are going to merit to finally greet Mashiach. And we have the merit of being able to be in tune with that higher frequency and sense Mashiach's imminence. And the Rebbe said this is not divorced from the literal metaphor of the heel. Because the heel, ultimately, is what the whole body stands on. The body stands on the feet or on the soles or on the heel, including the head, including the heart. And furthermore, in order for the head and heart to be able to move forward, in order for them to have the privilege of mobility, you need to have heels, working feet. And as such, it is the heels that are able to bring the head and the heart to its destination of desire. And the Rebbe said, it's very important for us to remember this paradox so it doesn't get to our heads. So we don't feel all high and mighty and think that we are better than previous generations. We are most effective when we know that we are much smaller than our ancestors, much poorer spiritually than our ancestors, at least from the perspective of our own achievements, from our own level of passion and thoughtfulness. Our own consciousness is far, far more impoverished than that of the generations that preceded us. But at the same time, if we humbly accept our mission, knowing with great humility that the gift that is ours is only ours because we have received so much from those who have toiled and labored and sacrificed before us, then we indeed, as the midget on the giant's shoulders, will be able to finally reach the prize and the destination. We, Emir Hashem, will be the ones to finally greet Mashiach. My friends, this is really and truly an incredibly empowering and uplifting message. We are living in very dark times, very difficult times. We are seeing a resurgence of hatred for Jewish people that we thought was a thing of the past. And we don't see a way out of this. We don't see how Israel is going to be able to overcome its many enemies. We don't see a clear path forward. And we're so spiritually impoverished in comparison with previous generations. But my friends, we must know that as we are seemingly right now at the very bottom of things, we can hear the footsteps of Mashiach. And that we have been given what it takes to get across the finish line and to finally bring Mashiach into our realm. May we continue to inspire each other. May we find the strength that Hashem has invested and encoded into our realities. And may we be zeicha to succeed in bringing Mashiach into our world through our mitzvahs, through our Torah study, through our ahavat Yisrael, through our care and commitment to others, through our tzedakah, through our generosity and giving. May we merit the Eretz Hashem to see the coming of Mashiach bepoil mamash, b'mheira u'biyameinu speedily, and in our days. Amen. Thank you so much for joining. Have a beautiful evening.